Hello.
Hello.
Well, thank you for getting together today. Today on our conversation, we have Sarah Cherry. Sarah Cherry is our teacher of medical Qigong. She's a doctor of medical Qigong, and she has a practice here in Nashville. And she's an expert not only in medical Qigong, but also in Feng Shui. And she is an expert Taoist. She likes to help people in the field of healing themselves and guiding them through the healing process, incorporating not only physical but also spiritual, emotional, and mental aspects of the healing process. We also have with us Cindy. Cindy and I are colleagues. We're Sarah's students, and let's see. Well, I guess I'll just move into the questions.
Okay. Well, so when Yuli and I first started talking about what we might ask you if we were given the opportunity to interview you, a ton of things, of course, came up. You know, we could talk to you all day long about any of these subjects. But given the backdrop of the world pandemic and the civil unrest and all of the things that are going on, what jumped to my mind was your metal rat feng shui, or your metal rat predictions for the year. And what, first of all, I suppose, because most of the people that I work with don't know anything about feng shui, including myself. I know very, very little about it. So is there a way to kind of give a short, I know you do classes in the community and it's a subject that is enormous. Is there a way that you can explain how feng shui describes or kind of forms an idea or a picture of what might happen in a year? And then because I had read your predictions at the beginning of the year, what is your take from the feng shui perspective about events happening and how things might unfold throughout the rest of the year?
Okay. The first thing I want to talk about from that perspective is something that you run across in all forms of Chinese astrology and metaphysics, and that's called the intercalary month. And so before we talk about the rat year and the months specifically, this needs to be dealt with. We are just now leaving the intercalary month. What that is an adjustment that has been made to rectify the lunar calendar with the solar calendar. And it's always thought of in Chinese culture as a very difficult month. So here we are looking at this very difficult year, and we will leave the intercalary month, which is roughly 28, 30 days. We will leave that month in a couple of days. So we have been in that very difficult month. It's always a repeat of the fourth month, which is snake month. Happens every couple, 3 years. So we're just now leaving that month, which is very, very difficult. And so that's a good thing. The other way that I can answer your question, and bear in mind, Chinese astrology and feng shui is very complicated, and it has many, 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 many layers. So what I'm going to speak to is the highest level that would affect, that's general and that affects everybody. So in feng shui and Chinese astrology, it's all based, feng shui is based a great deal on the numerology. And so if you look at the numerology for the year, Numerology is the heavenly stems, the 5 elements, the heavenly stems, the heavenly influence on the earth, right? And so, you know, we're in Yang metal rat year. And Yang metal, the numerology for that number is number 7. And in Chinese numerology, that's it's an inauspicious number. Typically, if someone had a natal chart with the number 7 in the section of their front door, depending on what else was there, they might be advised to take extra precautions, because the number 7 can portend conflict. It can portend break-ins. It can portend destruction, those kinds of things. There are positive aspects that roll into play at some point, but generally that's the rule of thumb for what we have been dealing with this year. Over the metal rat, and of course, the energy of Yang metal, you're thinking of big, heavy metal things. And rat is inherently a water element, the animal of the rat. And so the picture is this heavy metal suppressing this water that needs to flow and it needs to meander. So that's generally what we're looking at, or what we have been experiencing this year. Generally, metal rat years are considered stressful. So what I did was I looked at the rest of the year as far as the numerology of the month, and then also the ebb and flow of the ease with which the rat year moves among the months. The months in Chinese astrology are the earthly branches, or the animal signs, as most people know them. And like all people, some of the animal signs get along really well and some don't. So as it turns out, we have this month, the yearly animal had a clash with horse, which was June. So this month we've had not only from an astrological perspective the yearly monthly clash, but also the intercalary month, which is significant. Unfortunately, there's another clash in July with rat and goat. The type of clash that one is, though, is it's the kind of clash where something happens and it's not necessarily pleasant, but it ends up being okay. So that's sort of July. Then again in September, there's another clash. So, but we have a little bit of a break. We have a little bit of a break in August. And the monthly numerology shifts towards the end of the year, which is should be helpful. Beginning in September is kind of a good news, bad news kind of a thing, because you have an earthly branch clash, yet the heavenly stem for the month is the number 1, which is a water star and very auspicious. It's typically the money star. So, but because there's an earthly branch clash, we may see some shifting and changing with some financial aspects, either locally or globally. But ultimately, it'll work out okay. Then beginning though in October, November, December, the monthly numbers are very auspicious for the year 2020. And you don't have any, after September, throughout the rest of the year, you don't have an earthly branch clash. Now, in the new year for 2021 is going to be the metal ox, which won't happen until February the 12th of next year. And February could be a very stressful month. Sometimes the old year kind of goes out with a bang. So, but basically we should see some easing up of a number of different types of tensions from October, November, and December. January starts again with a sort of inauspicious monthly star. And of course, everything that I've just said is general information that applies to the year. And then people would look at the charts for their country, their city, their town, their space, to sort of drill down, because it's layer after layer after layer.
Yeah.
I
Go ahead.
wonder also if you have any thoughts how this year's metal and next year is going to be a further movement into the yin, further drop into the yin. So how would that, like, we're going to be, I mean, it's a constructive thing.
Yes.
So, and usually the extremes, and we're going to be at the most extreme year of a cycle next year. And then it will start to be rising young. Any reflections on how that goes?
Well, the jump from rat to ox, if you just think about the animals, is profound. And the nature of the animal, the rat being quick and clever and always moving around and hiding and this and that, and you know, large groups, and they reproduce quickly, and then you think of the ox. The ox, huge, heavy, very yin in itself being. And we move from yang metal, which is weaponry. It's cars, tanks, any large metal. We move to yin metal, which is more like jewelry and sparkly things. And so there's a very characteristic difference in when you move from yang to yin. And then there's going to be a huge shift moving from rat to ox. And so the pace of, you know, everything this year seems to have moved so fast. You think, you know, that's running, you know, everywhere. And next year that's going to shift. Things are going to drop into a much heavier, a much slower pace. Things are going to seem that more stable in one sense, but then you run the risk of things getting stuck. So that's kind of the nature of yin. Yin is you know, it's forming, it's creative, it's making form, but then once you get that form, you have to be aware of that and keep the energy moving.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. What are your suggestions then, as we move into this yin period? How do we bring about the movement, or do we just go with the flow? What would be your advice on balancing yin and yang?
Well, one of the primary principles in any esoteric tradition, and it was written over many of the Western esoteric temples and such, is know thyself. And because the answer to your question is it depends. The Chinese were famous for believing in balance. And so what that means, of course, is that balancing yin and yang, you can have too much of either one, and the balance for one is actually the other. And so getting stuck in either too much activity or not enough activity is where the danger lies. It can be a danger for not only for physical, mental, emotional health, relationships, any kind of interaction where the human being needs to make itself known. So balance is the key.
Thank you.
Okay. So when we practice Qigong, I guess we first focus on making sure that we are grounded and hooked up. So we make sure that we are in the right space and balance and light. But in the last 3 or 4 months, I found myself, and I'm sure you too, of where my energy needed to be less so with me and most so being gifted to others. So I was wondering, Sarah, if you could share some of your Qigong practices where you create the energy and hold the space and give it to the community, to the environment, so that that energy has a chance to just go where it needs to be and deliver the universal good to wherever it's in need.
From what I'm coming to in my own practice and in my own life is that the best thing I can do, and working hard at this, is to get myself out of the way, so that the divine or source or whatever it is can actually come through me and manifest in the world outside me. A teacher that I've studied with once said, he said, whenever you perceive a problem, who is always there? And of course, the answer was, oh, that would be me.
Yeah.
That would be me. And so in that frame of mind, then working with my own stuff and trying to get out of the way so that the divine can actually come through. Now, that said, what I really mean by that is actually working through and with my higher self as much as possible. And that said, there are many different things that can assist us in doing this. We can use things such as, setting the space, whether it's with prayer or meditation, or a spiritual practice. It could be yoga, it could be Qigong, it could be Tai Chi. All of those things help us connect with our true selves and who we really are, and that blank slate that is who we were before we incarnated into these bodies that we have. We can also use tools like if you have a private altar at home, lighting a candle to help you focus, lighting incense. All of these things are things that I try to do in my personal practice, to just align with my higher self and then allow in gratitude and in love the higher beings to come through.
Mm-hmm. I also noticed that a lot of people that I've worked with, when it got busy this spring, and not in a good way, people a lot of the times just withdrew from these type of activities in their own lives because they were just preoccupied. And I just found myself compelled to just even continue energetically helping them. And I think they felt it. They would say, yes, please send me love, send me some light, and help me focus on whatever presented for them. And I think, that's very important to do for one another.
It is, but we also can remember that while you're doing that, what you're really doing is connecting with the divine, and it's the divine that actually does the work.
Yeah. Always happy to do it because, you know, while you're doing it, you're in it.
That's true. That's true.
It's that double healing
Yeah.
that we are always kind of benefited by when we do the healing work
Right.
that we do. So being in the situations that we're in, the tenseness, the isolation, the alienation, in particular, I find myself, I almost feel like a channel for this enormous anger that is happening at this time. And that can be really uncomfortable. But as I am trying to do personal work, I try to find, you know, how am I contributing to it? And you have talked to our class before, or our Taoist group before, about this idea of forgiveness, and using the technique of Ho'oponopono. And I think sometimes it's counterintuitive when people feel like they are not part of the problem, like people are being aggressive to them. Why should they ask forgiveness? But I find the practice is it really is releasing and elevating. Can you answer that question? Why should I forgive you for hurting me?
That is a really good question. That is a very good question. I have come around, and obviously over the last 10 years, if it was 10 years ago or a year ago or 5 years ago, I would have answered that question differently. But this is where I am at this moment, so you and whoever listens to this can take it or leave it. So my belief at this moment is it's really pretty simple, and what it is, it's based on the idea that forgiveness is nothing more than taking full responsibility for your actions, for everything that you are about, that you are, and that you may or may not have done, omission, commission, anything. And so if you look at that idea from the macro perspective, what you find, if you believe in reincarnation, then when you take responsibility, then that means through all your past lives. And I'm not the kind of elevated soul to know what all those past lives are, but I have reason to believe I did some pretty bad things in them. And so, and some pretty good things too, I hope. But even if you don't believe in reincarnation, then we learn from modern physics and biology the idea of epigenetics, and that we actually inherit trauma and pain from our ancestors, and they inherited it from their ancestors. And so it becomes really quickly so vast that we can't even begin to know. There's a lot of the pain and trauma that lives in us subconsciously that we don't even know about. That if somebody could have x-ray vision or go-go gadget eyes or whatever, and they could see it, we would go, oh no, that's really not. That's not, but it really is, because it's either in our supraconscious or our subconscious. Now, when I say our, I'm talking about us as incarnated human beings, right? Every spiritual practice that I've ever looked at ascribes to our higher self or our original being as part of the divine. That's a Taoist, a tenet, Buddhist, whatever, and that when we come in, that the eternal kernel, as I sometimes call it, is pure. It doesn't have all of these memories. It doesn't have all of this genetic makeup that comes necessarily with our physical body. That's the higher self. Everything else, that's the signal. Everything else is noise. Now, one thing that is talked a lot about in many religious traditions is the idea of emptiness. So what does emptiness, what does that really mean? Well, emptiness is in my view, emptiness is that space where the higher self resides. It's empty. It's from the divine. It's perfection. It doesn't have all of this other stuff that we got, that we willingly took on as we became humans. Now, here's the catch that will answer your question. And so when we are working on, helping other people, right? Mm-hmm. We learn in Qigong to move energy and work with the divine and send prayers and all of these sorts of things that can be very helpful to other people. But the only spiritual being that we have the absolute capability to affect is ourselves. That's it. That's it. And the beauty of it, the way I see this, that the whole weft and weave of interactivity with human beings is, the beauty of it is that when I am able to transmute something in myself, then it's transmuted for everybody. Sometimes there will be people who can't cross over, and by me transmuting something inside me will allow that to be transmuted in them, and they'll be able to cross over. And so, by your question of why should you forgive someone who did something bad to you, right? Well, holding on, this is a Buddhist thing, holding on to anger or rage or blame or jealousy or all of those things, holding on to them is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, that is the principle behind Ho'oponopono. And I'm not going to go into Ihale Kalahulen's story, but he basically transformed a psychiatric ward of people who were mentally, criminally insane using this practice. And there are a number of practices that will help people work towards this. We've used in the Qigong realm, Song Kong Tong, which is a Buddhist chant with tapping. EFT with tapping works on the principle of physics and energy releasing and whatnot. Colin Tippett has a really wonderful process called radical forgiveness. And it's a process that that someone can go through to help change to help reframe your thinking about a certain particular event and another person. But Ho'oponopono is probably the most elegant of all of the strategies for forgiveness. And it's based on the premise that we take full responsibility for transforming ourselves. Because if we see something out in the world, if we notice it, it's just like, who is the one person that's always there when you have a problem? That would be me. And if I notice something, the reason that I'm able to notice it is because it's in me, and therefore I can affect it. And so, by 4 simple statements: I'm sorry, repentance. Please forgive me, forgiveness. I love you, and thank you. And the I love you and thank you is calling in the divine for transmutation. And sometimes it takes a while working through it in this way. But anything that, I want to read something. This is from a teacher that I've studied just about my whole life named Rudolf Steiner. And Rudolf Steiner was born around the turn of the century. He died in 1924 in Austria and was there during the rise of Hitler. Of course, he died shortly before Hitler rose to power. But this is talking about the idea of how the higher self works for everyone. And he says, you will understand how this is connected in an example. You will build a church for others, not for yourself. You can, in very truth, take it into yourselves a world of majesty, beauty, and splendor, if you experience this world as such. To do something for the higher self does not partake of egoism, because it is not done only for the self. The higher self will be united with others, so that what is done for the higher self is at the same time done for all. So that sort of sums up what the idea of, in Colin Tipping's words, radical forgiveness is about. There's a beautiful Buddhist prayer of forgiveness. And as you know, we have a prayer that we use in our clinical settings, written by Gwendolyn Alvin Jones from the book A Cry from the Womb, that goes through the very lengthy process of calling in the divine, asking for forgiveness, and making every effort to sort of transmute those thoughts and feelings.
Thank you.
That's amazing. I really loved, and I wrote down what you said. Holding anger is like drinking poison and hoping for others to die. I mean, that just gives me goosebumps thinking of this phrase and seeing what's going on in the world and with the human suffering, and also specifically in our country, with the racist issues brought to urgent attention.
Yeah. And this really, I have had a lot of consternation, let's just say, about some of the things that have gone on. And this process of understanding that I can work on my higher self, I can work through my higher self, and that it will help. I mean, and that it will help the collective. What the quote from Steiner and some of the Buddhist and Taoist and Christian tenets, it's really talking about the Akashic record, because you know everything that idea is that everything we do and think and say is somehow recorded somewhere, and in the fabric of the universe, the consciousness, the collective consciousness. There's a million names for it, and basically the sort of way things work is that you put something out there, then it's yours. It's yours. And with all of the myriad of ways that we come in contact with different types of energies through either our own past lives or the genetic past of our entire family from, cavemen until now, and taking responsibility for what that is. Because, I mean, who's going to take responsibility for that if you don't? I mean, it somehow ended up being you, so, uh, and it's very freeing, really, because I can only say that it also gives you peace. It also gives you peace. Um, sometimes things happen very suddenly and shift, and sometimes they don't, but you're just a lot more peaceful. And the thing that is important here about forgiveness, going back to your original question, is that when we talk about this higher self, I know there's a lot of information out there and a lot of noise. The noise to signal ratio is just crazy. So how do we understand what to believe? Well, the way we understand where the light is, the truth, the light, the way, the truth, and the light is through our higher self. And connecting with that higher self and working with it, then we will be able to have the connection to the places and the, I don't want to say, well, beings or whatever it is. For some people, you would say God or whatever, that will guide us in the right way. But with all of this crowded stuff, living in the memories and all of our emotions and thoughts, and that you're not going to be able to separate the signal from the noise. And so clearing out that higher self is where it is.
Yeah, yes. While you were talking, there is a channel by the name of Matt Kahn, and his idea, going not just to forgiveness, but to the whole concept of karma and what he calls soul contracts and all of this other stuff. If I can do justice to it, we are here. So many people approach these issues of karma, whether they're personal or these big, sweeping societal things, cultural things, as eye for an eye, which basically just perpetuates the problem. It just adds to all the stuff now you've got to clear. And his idea that I thought was really interesting, and I kind of subscribe to this, or at this point I do, is that actually we're all here together, especially people that you have karma with, to make a better decision this time.
Right.
That it's less about, oh, last lifetime you chopped off my head, so I'm going to chop off your head, or at least your ear or your nose or something.
Right.
Instead of that kind of leveling, which is, in my opinion, that's a dead end, or just keeps things going. It's more about being able to have the awareness and the presence. And I think the whole idea of forgiveness, you doing your forgiveness work, your personal work, kind of sets you in the stage of saying, I can do this in such a way that if we carry on together in another lifetime, there is peace
Yes.
instead of a rocky road.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
And the idea of humility comes in also with the idea of forgiveness, because,
yeah,
um, you have to really just kind of get over your fancy self if you're going to say, you know what, I don't know what's going on with you, but I'm going to take responsibility for my part in it. It's like
that's true.
whatever is in you, because that's the way Lynn cured or healed. It's whatever is in you, whatever is in me that's causing you to behave that way. I take responsibility for it. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. Thank you. And and to me, that is the right tone of humility. And to me, people throw around love and gratitude all the time to where it kind of gets like sliced bread or something. But in that context, where you're calling in the divine, and you are saying that this, and you won't believe it when you first start saying it. It's everybody
Hmm.
that does it, but you will eventually. And I have been in processes with different events and situations, and just right in the middle of it, I realized what I actually did that set off that chain of reaction. And when I started on it, I had no idea. I thought I was
Yeah.
perfect, but you don't have to have something like that. You can work on big things. Like you can work on tackle all of it. You know,
Hmm.
if you're seeing it, then you have a part of it.
Right. I find it's really helpful on the I'm sorry, please forgive me phase is to make a comment like, I'm sorry if something I did triggered you to treat me the way that you did.
If that helps
Um,
you, that's great.
that helps me. I don't know that that necessarily would be universal. Or
Yeah.
please forgive me, it was inadvertent. I did not, I acted out of lack of skill or ignorance or whatever it is. That helped me get the ball rolling so that I wasn't feeling like I was taking on all of the blame for a two-way kind of relationship. Anyway,
There, there is also, like to sort of generalize, we also usually have the psychological discrepancy between self and another person, because we always overvalue our input, our importance, our feelings, and discount those of the other person. And it takes effort and grace to just notice what's going on, and the other person is actually doing the same thing on their end, that you both have to just kind of like acknowledge it and start fresh. You let all the debts and hurts go to zero, and but you got to notice it first, and therefore it has to come from your heart, from self. And no wonder working on yourself sometimes is even harder than taking somebody else through those type of exercises.
And to y'all's point, Colin Tipping's process of radical forgiveness, NLP has some great guidelines for reframing and reworking different thought processes, um, working through like a standard prayer, like the Buddhist prayer of forgiveness or Gwen's forgiveness prayer. Those are great steps that can help you along, anybody that can help. And everything that I've said, if anybody is listening to this, you can Google it. And it's all, Tipping's basic process is free. It's a download PDF. You can find the Buddhist prayer of forgiveness in a lot of places. You can get Gwen's book on Amazon. And all of those processes and their tools, and they all go to the same place. Many, many paths to the same place. So it's all available. It's all out there, and it all helps a lot.
Well, the next question is quite natural then. So what do we do? What are your recommendations for some self-focused self-care practices that will bring somebody to be ready to do this thing, like to forgive and do something, take responsibility, especially in the nowadays environment? Sarah.
Okay, so in today's environment, the good thing about our sort of time out with varying degrees of isolation is that it has in many ways sort of slowed things down. In some family situations, it's revved things up because everybody is home all the time, and you're, in each other's spaces and all of that. And so it's difficult to answer that question because it's so individual. Since we're having this conversation right now, I would have to say, first of all, as far as self-care is concerned, that this whole global pandemic thing, it's my feeling that it's going to be with us a while. And so understanding that and just sort of rocking with it or rolling with it could potentially avert some frustration. The other thing dovetailed into that is people, I think, need to be very realistic about where they are on the continuum of being of risk with the pandemic, and behave accordingly. The other thing that I think is really important, if it's possible, and that would be to maintain a spiritual practice. If you had a spiritual practice before, do what you can to sort of maintain it. Along with that would go whatever other practices you had for movement. Whether it's walking or hiking or running or jogging or whatever, or a Qigong, Weigong practice, yoga or Qigong or Tai Chi or any of those other practices, to do what you can to maintain those practices for your health. Eating good food. I've had to look at myself and say, are you hungry or are you just bored? And, not only the idea of some people get stressed out and they can't eat. Some people like me get stressed out and they want to eat everything. And so doing what you can to eat healthy and what you know is good for your body is, I think, really, really important self-care. Another one is getting enough rest, if at all possible. I know that sometimes stress can interrupt sleep. So you may think, oh my God, I slept 8 or 10 hours and I've never done that before. And maybe your body just needed that at the time. And so cutting yourself some slack on situations like that. It's like, well, so what if you overslept? If you were able to, because of your job or your role in the family or whatever. I would recommend, as I've said to several people before, that in times like this, often less is more. And in this still and sort of quiet time, it's okay not to have all these things to do. It's okay just to, sit out on the deck or the patio with your family and talk and really appreciate those times. Have longer meals. where you sit around and you know, if you're with a family, where you sit and you talk. But less is more. So, and then back to the old idea that we talked about earlier of balance. You know, having one or the other, having activity versus stillness, being able to meet that balance, I think, is very satisfying and very nurturing.
Yeah. Maybe for a lot of people, it also has been like it has been for me, where we have more of the inward look, which actually goes along with what's going on with the astrology, like we were talking, and that's a good time, even though there's a lot of things going on that we have to process. It's not it's not, when you look inside, you don't want to just say, okay, I don't care, you know, but use the time that you have now with yourself, with your family, that in the past you just used to go out and play. And so now it's good to pay attention to what you notice about your own old hiccups and address those in whichever sphere of life they may fall into. And I want to ask one more question, our last question, because I think we're running out of time, is about remote Qigong work. Right now, like a lot of people are, you know, we're opening up, but still a lot of people are going to be for quite some time still minimize their social interactions. And so it's important that people know that the remote Qigong energy treatments, they do work. And I just wanted to see if you could share with us some of your stories or reflections on the importance of the fact that it does work remotely. It doesn't have to be hands to hands, and that people should know and not pass on that with disbelief. So
yeah, I've had the good fortune, many times of, and of course, we work from an energetic standpoint. You know, a patient will come to us and say, oh, my doctor said I have this, which is a medical Western diagnosis. But we work expressly from an energetic standpoint. But there is a correlation between what Western medicine says this thing is and what we perceive and sense energetically. And the way, of course, the way that we approach it is through the processes of 5 elements and the meridians and, you know, all that. And I'll just say that I've had the good fortune to sometimes be working on patients who were in a medical doctor's care, and they wouldn't tell me about something that was going on with them. And in the debrief after the session, I would say, oh, by the way, energetically, this was what I picked up. And then the patient would then say, oh, I forgot to tell you, this is what's going on with me. It would be something that my impression was, let's say, of the thyroid, was that it was, maybe it looked, and here again, these sort of signals and intuitions, when you're a medical intuitive, my impressions may look the same as yours or Cindy's, or they may be entirely different, but we all know what they mean. And so, like I may see a thyroid that's all shriveled and dried up, and I mention this to the patient, and she says, oh, yeah, you know, I have a thyroid condition, and it's been diagnosed in, you know, Western medical terms. It's like, you know, fine. And we can help a lot with getting the body's energy system moving. And of course, in Chinese medicine, stagnation is one of the things that's most deadly as far as the overall health of the body is concerned. And so whether it's an in-person treatment, and I miss in-person treatments, I really do. I like connecting you know,
Yeah.
one-on-one very much, and I know you all do too.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all nodding.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. But we have technology now, which helps. You know, we can do Zoom and Skype, or we can talk on the phone. I use just the phone, and we chat, and then we either hang up or, you know, put the phone on mute, and then we talk afterwards to debrief. So there is that connection, and now obviously we can do. There's a number of web-based where you can actually look at the person. But yeah, it's very, very powerful, very potent, and the way we were trained, it's as good as, except for the human contact, which I miss, and y'all do too. You know, the efficacy is very strong.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. This has been fun.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again
Would love to.
because there's always so much more, Sarah,
Yeah.
to ask. And one of the things I really appreciate about you is whenever I have a question, I'm always overthinking. So, you know, it's going to be outer space and all of this other kind of stuff. And you always kind of bring me back to, well, did you ever think that it might be your feet need to be on the ground? And I'm like, oh, I didn't think of that. So I always enjoy your explanations because you make very complicated subjects accessible.
Well, thank you. And trust me, I have been those places.
Yeah, kind of hard to believe, but
Totally overthinking, out in the stratosphere, down to the core of the earth and back, and it's just so, yeah, but thank you.
I appreciate you making the time to
Yeah.
do this with us.
I was happy to.
Thank you. And like I said, the quote, I mean, is amazing about drinking poison and hoping for others to die while you're holding anger. Yeah.
Yep.
That should go into the famous quotes.
Well, it is. It's from the Buddha.
Ah,
Yeah, it's from
Okay.
the Buddha. And been there, done that. So
yeah.
it resonated with me too.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you. Y'all have a good rest of the day.
Thanks. You too. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.